Hello, everybody, and welcome to this in conversation. My name's David Berthold. I'm the director of the Centre for Creative Practices here at NIDA. Where I am today, here I'm on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and of course this land has been a place of community and culture and resilience for 60,000 years or more now. And I'd like to pay my respects to all elders, past, present and future, and particularly at this time when yet again there's a focus on the systemic injustices experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and Black lives everywhere, as well as many people of colour here and around the world. And we certainly look forward to a time when all cultures and identities are properly respected and embraced. My guest today is Alice Babidge. Welcome, Alice.
Hi, David.
Hi.
Hi.
It's great to catch you, actually, because I know you're usually traveling all around the world doing all sorts of things. In a moment, I'll go back to the beginning of your career, but it's probably worth noting just the kind of volume of your career so far. In film, some really well-known films like Snowtown and the True History of the Kelly Gang quite recently, and The Dig, but certainly in theatre, which is probably where you're most known, theatre and opera. I think you've had a couple of shows on Broadway and the West End and Centre, English National Opera, the Paris Opera and Ballet, the Borg Theatre in Vienna, Blindborn, Deutsche Schauspielhaus, and the Comic Opera in Berlin, which is Barrie Kosky's house. So we had Barrie a little while back chatting with you.
Barrie.
Yeah. So it's a big career. We'll talk a little bit about some of those experiences in a little while, but I want to start by asking you about your early design memories. So I remember you telling me once that when you were a kid, you used to watch movies and read books and then go and redo all the costumes in your time. Is that one of the earliest memories of design?
Yeah, I think that is my earliest, and I didn't know that's what I was doing. I didn't know that was design. I didn't know that was a job. But I did used to watch things and kind of I guess now I would say that I reconceived them, but I would just draw them how I thought they should be. Not because I thought it was better, just because I was just like fixing my kind of imagination with it. And it was also just something, I don't know, it came out of nowhere. No one talked to me about it. I just started drawing these forms, and it was just mostly women at the beginning because, I was like 7 or 8 and drawing like a princess was a nice thing. But then it kind of really naturally evolved into like wanting to draw the prince. And then if you were drawing the prince, wouldn't you draw the child? And it didn't ever make sense to me until I think I was maybe 17. That whole kind of journey didn't become a kind of whole idea until 10 years later.
Wow. And so what was it how did that, really natural enthusiasm begin to turn into a career?
Again, I don't know. It's like I fell into it the whole way. I remember the first thing I ever saw was Les Mis in Adelaide at the Festival Centre. I was probably 6, maybe a little bit older. My mum's best friend took me, and I just remember, flags and Jean Valjean, and thinking it was the most kind of magical thing I'd ever witnessed. I've still never designed a musical and probably never will, but I love them. But I did drama, but then I would also do textiles, and then it all just kind of fell into the same pot. And this is my career is what came out of it. It's hard. It's sort of hard to articulate, but it just all happened. I never thought about it very much, and it wasn't until I'd finished high school and I started sort of working out that it was a job that I could do, that I then began to kind of focus on what that would mean as a career and begin to sort of find my kind of ambition in it.
Mm. I remember you, I think when I was working in Sydney and you coming to meet with me when you were very young, I think probably maybe just out of high school actually.
I think I was 17.
Were you? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I have incredibly vivid memories of you because, you know, you attached yourself to the theatre company. And
or whether you wanted me or not, I was going to be there.
Yeah, and I was working quite a lot with Fiona Cromby at that time, who was doing a lot of work for the Australian Theatre for Young People. And you know, Fiona very much took you under her wing.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah, I became complete. I met Fiona. Fiona, when she was in her last year at NIDA, came to my high school and spoke to us about being a theatre designer, even though she was just graduating. Mm. And I listened to her and I thought, hey, that's kind of like what I do. So I'll just do that. And she talked about how she was going to work at the Australian Theatre for Young People. And I was like, there it is. So I emailed you and then became like a leech and met Fiona properly and then really just leeched myself there. And I spent 2 years working, you know, with you and with her solely at ATYP across so many shows and so many projects, and then some things on my own before I then went to NIDA. Mm. And it was kind of the greatest. It was the greatest part of my education because it taught me about how to be a theatre maker and how to be a collaborator and how to work in a team before I went into that bit about how do you read a play. Right. Or, you know, it was incredible. And then Fiona and I continued and continue to work together now, albeit the dynamic has changed and we're, you know, she's production designer and I'm a costume designer and we sort of work together in that way. But it's very much, that was very much the beginning of a really long creative relationship.
Yeah, you and Fiona remained friends for a long time. And as you say, you've worked together on a lot of projects.
Yeah.
In film and theatre. And, you know, Fiona is, you know, doing a lot of work, production design work for films, actually quite a lot now. And occasionally you've been costume designer on those films.
Yeah.
You've just set up a company with Fiona, haven't you?
Fiona and Fiona's husband, Peter Knowles, and I have just set up our own production company. Yes. Working across kind of like a range of forms, from like fashion and editorial to music and whatever kind of comes our way, really. Just
what's your company called?
Our company is called Ross and Lawrence. Ross and Lawrence were for NIDA students, the people who would take care of us, people who would sign us in and out, who would be on the desk after hours when Fiona was there and Peter, and then later when I was there. You know, they were kind of our protectors and our parents and our security. So we named our company after them.
That's lovely.
Yeah, it felt very natural.
I imagine you were kind of the last to leave the building.
Yeah, we would. Often. I mean, designers especially. We would, and I loved having the sort of run of the place to ourselves. But you'd hear Lawrence's footsteps along the corridor about an hour before lockup, and then you'd hear them again 15 minutes, again at 5, and then he'd usually slip us an extra half hour or so to try and get our work done.
Right. Wow. So your partnership and friendship with Fiona over many, many years now, you know, almost 20 years actually.
Almost 20 years, yeah.
Yes. And actually your career, like right across all those places I listed, you know, around the world, not all of them, but most of them are actually with long-term collaborators, long-term directors. You know, Andrews, Simon Stone, Barrie Kosky, Neil Armfield. Like, so they've continually come to you and you've continually come to them.
Yeah.
Theatre and opera and film. That must be quite sustaining for you. Do you have have you noticed different approaches with those long-term?
Completely.
Right.
Completely. I mean, my kind of like my process is sort of the same, I guess, to a certain extent ish. But the way that I work with all of them is completely different and completely sort of authentic to how our relationship began and then sort of grew. And I love them all. I love all of our collaborators for different reasons. Some of them are much quicker than others. Some of them I have more sort of private time than others, but they are all, I mean, they're all these brilliant artists. And I include Justin Cozell in that group, who kind of make me better at my job through the kind of gauntlets that they lay for me. It's, you know, it's amazing.
Can you share some examples of how their approaches are different and the way they work with you as a designer?
Okay, so Simon in theatre. Let's do Simon in theatre. Simon in theatre, we come to a project with a group of actors and a theatre. That's usually at the beginning all we know, and what the story is or what the story is based on. And the rehearsal period, which usually because it's in Europe is longer than what we have in Australia, we begin talking about how the story could play out. So usually on the first day of rehearsal, I have no characters and I don't know what the form of the work will necessarily take. So I work as an observer for weeks and a contributor, but I sort of just try and sit back and get to know the actors because usually it's new actors. And the costuming process evolves through that as Simon writes, as actors work, and as the thing sort of unpacks itself. And it's usually like a furious, like 5 days of costuming an entire show before you open it.
Right.
Unlike another process, like Neil and I have done a lot of opera together, and that's a lot of pre-work. A lot of, opera companies want designs years in advance. It's a lot more kind of imagination and drawing and working things out, but then allowing ourselves enough room for the rehearsal process to inform changes and shifts, and the singers to kind of, flex themselves within whatever it is that we're doing.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And what about film? Do you work differently in film when you're design?
My first feature was with Justin, and it was his first feature, my first feature, and Fiona's first feature. Snowtown, yeah. And we all just kind of found our way. No one had ever really told us how you work on a film before, so you just sort of invent your process. Right. And that invention of process is something that I've really retained. I do a lot of research. It is different. And it is different primarily because through pre-production, you often don't have your cast. You might start your pre-production period, you might have 6 weeks and you might have 3 cast members. So you can have all of the ideas in the world, but until there's an actor in that role, it's kind of a little redundant. So you spend a lot of time waiting and then chasing your tail, but that kind of, it's an amazing form of adrenaline, that process. And you sort of, I sort of like play games with myself. It's like, if what's my conception of that character? And then there's an actor in it. I'm like, does it still fly? Does it still work? Can we meet on the same page? And I've really enjoyed the film process.
Yeah. You've spoken about costume quite a lot there. And I mean, it's certainly true that your career has developed in a way that's predominantly costume.
Yeah.
Now, is that actually a preference, or did it just happen to be that's what you just got asked to do all the time?
I don't really have a preference. I would happily, in terms of theatre and opera, I would happily do either.
Right.
And for me, it's about the project and about the team and about where the director kind of thinks I best serve in that kind of project. And I'll sort of jump on either. And in film, you kind of need to pick one. You can't. The scope of the jobs are so huge in film that you can't sort of tackle both, I don't think, in a really in a really kind of dedicated way. And I love actors. Like, I love working with actors. I love the invention. I love watching how they take an idea that we've formed in a fitting and it becomes something else on stage, or it finds its home, or the whole thing just clicks into place. I find that so satisfying creatively, that if I had to pick one, it would be costume. But then I sort of get a bit sad about, what about the world? Why can I build the world too? Like, you get a bit grabby. But
let's talk a little bit about your love of actors for a moment, because sometimes an actor can wear a costume and sometimes a costume can wear an actor.
Well, then it's a bad costume.
That's a bad costume. So how do you go about kind of ensuring that the actor is part and authentically part of the creation of what?
I just have an idea. I just have an idea. I'm not the one who breathes the life into the idea. So my job is to work with an actor to get to us both to a point where we think an idea is true for them and true for what they're trying to do. Because if they feel like there's integrity in what they're wearing, then they can do their job. And I am just like a cog in the wheel of getting them to a point where they can be that character. And so it's not about what I would like the costume to be. It's about what serves them and the story and the overarching kind of ideas that are at play.
I guess related to that, I've rarely seen you create costumes that are obviously period. You have an uncanny way, even if the show is ostensibly set a long time ago, you have an uncanny way of suggesting period, while also feeling that those costumes and those identities are in the here and the now. Is that important to you? Like, how do you go about achieving that?
I think for me, I am like period, contemporary, whatever. I used to be all like, I just want to do clothes, that are now on people. And I think what I realized was that what I want to do is design clothes, not costumes. And then I realized that it doesn't actually matter what the period is. They can still be clothes. And that idea kind of fed itself into, well, if me now in 2020 and I am designing something that is set in 1930, I will lean on 1930, but I will lean on 1920, I will lean on 1910. And if I need to, I will lean on 1960, because what I need to do is create a world that speaks to that period and has the kind of breath and life of it, but also speaks to our contemporary eye in a way that we can understand and translate the story that's being told, because that's the most important thing. How are we telling this story? What is this story we are trying to tell? So I think notions of period and detail is really, really important, but I also think that you can craft it and use it differently as a tool of communication.
Yeah, and I think you've always been really thorough about your sense of storytelling, and that's one way that becomes evident. Yeah. I just want to talk about your time at Sydney Theatre Company for a little bit. You were a resident designer there for a little while, doing some big shows. But the bit I just want to mention first is actually you were there during the greening of the wharf. And I know you have a strong ethos in terms of sustainability as a human being.
Yeah.
And I know that you were very conscious about engaging in a practice when you were creating costumes or creating sets, designing those things, that you're conscious of doing that in a sustainable way, very conscious of that.
Yeah.
And, more and more, of course, theatre and film needs to address this, in the way shows are created and how they tour and everything.
Yeah.
So what sort of things were you thinking about?
I think, I mean, this is just, I guess it's just a reaction to the world that we live in and the world that we would hopefully continue to enjoy living in. So it's our responsibility within something that is, even more so than now, I guess you could say. We're not essential workers. There is a certain privilege that comes with the job that we have. And so I think to be conscious in the way that you approach that is really important. And it just, for me, it would come, I guess I'm always happy to strip back to tell a story in terms of creative vision and aesthetics. So why would I not be happy to also do that in terms of sustainable practice? So that they just sort of began to sort of go hand in hand. And at STC, it was kind of quite easy. Everyone was really on board with it. And it was about reuse. We'd reuse things. It's like, if you build flats for that theatre, why would you get rid of them? You'd keep them, because then, what's in the workshop? If I want to put a wall up, I'm not building a wall. I'm using stuff we've got. I'm just going to repaint it. And it's really basic stuff, but it has a huge impact on so many things in terms of our waste, but also in terms of how we use our manpower best, how we use our transport best. It has a real knock on. And I think in terms of costume, I became a major fan of the costume store. And why not? There's great stuff there. And there's also an added challenge of, just because I think it should be a blue t-shirt doesn't mean that it can't be a red jumpsuit that I found. It's like, take yourself out of the ease of this kind of, which I think this whole period has taught us again in a massive way, this kind of ease of access to things that can make your job easier, doesn't make you better and doesn't make the work better. Every kind of challenge that someone lays down for you should be a way in which you can kind of take another step up, as opposed to, a step back.
Yeah, totally. And all those little things were all implicated in that, in terms of, dealing with climate change.
Yeah.
And in terms of costume, you're very conscious about the choice of fabric, for example, or how they're cleaned day to day back then.
Completely. And I think I've probably become a lot smarter about that in recent years, but it was also always there's a room full of rolls of fabric. Yes, sometimes you might need to go and buy something because you're incredibly specific about what it needs to do, but why not just use the thing that's in there that you can then, spray down with vodka at the end of the night instead of dry cleaning, or just to kind of, make everyone's life a little bit easier.
Yeah. And lots of natural fibres, not much synthetic.
It's nicer for an actor to wear, and it's nicer for the environment to produce. So why not? It's also nicer to wash when you work with directors who love a lot of blood.
Gotcha. And your directors tend to, but still quite a lot of them.
Yeah, we like a messy show.
Yeah. You were talking a little bit when you were talking about your new company with Fiona Cromby and Peter Knowles, and talking about doing all the other things. And I guess your career is notable for doing lots of other things outside of theatre and film. Like, you've done a lot of video clips, fashion shoots, magazine covers, restaurant, the bar, quite a lot of work. That's outside of theatre and film. And so is that something you enjoy? And that was part of the reason, isn't it, for setting up that company?
It was. I do kind of enjoy it. I stumbled into editorial, fashion editorial work in Australia. I started working with Vogue. I started doing shoots and covers, and then meeting photographers who I liked working with, or other stylists, or there were actors who were doing projects, and I would come on board if they were on them. And then it's all just sort of people I've met and things I've done. I'm a creative consultant for a fashion brand in the UK. because I met the creative director when her son was in a film that I designed, and she said, I like your dresses, and I said, I like your dresses, and she said, why don't we make dresses together? And so, you know, now we do that, and you know, I oversee all of the campaigns and all of the visual assets. It was never anything I kind of had ambition to do. I just fell into it, and I do things if I enjoy them and feel like I can contribute something. And you know, you just fit it all in.
Yeah, you're really good at fitting it all in, I got to say. I mean,
you just can.
Well, I want to talk about that a bit more, because not only do you fit an enormous amount in and working in all sorts of far off places, but you also do really big works, like your Lost Echo with Barrie Kosky at Sydney Theatre Company, which was like 8 hours long.
Yep.
And Benedict Andrews' War of the Roses, which was similar length.
8 hours long.
8 hours long at Sydney Theatre Company. And you know, you did the costumes for Opera Australia's first ever ring cycle, you know, which is like 15 hours long. So you must be really good at kind of fitting everything in. So I guess there's two parts to that question. One is about how you manage those things when you might have quite normally 3 or 4 or 5 projects happening at the same time, and how you balance all that and give them real time. But also on those really big shows, and how you manage your time in that way as well, which you seem to me to be really good at it.
I think really early, because I started doing this quite a young age. I started working on big shows when I was quite young. I mean, The Lost Echo was my 3rd professional show. My first professional show was with you. My second was at Sydney Theatre Company. Oh, maybe it was my 4th. My second was with Robin Nevin. My 3rd was Benedict. And my 4th show, 8 hours long, was with Barrie Kosky. And so I just had to do it. So I learned how to do it. I also remember I used someone, and I was always the first to leave and the first to arrive and the last to leave. I was so terrified at the beginning that I wouldn't do a good job, that I worked until it was done. And that, I don't feel like that anymore. I love coming to a project with a little bit of fear, but I'm not scared of my job anymore. But I think it sort of built into me the way in which I needed to work. And so it feels like now it's sort of just muscle memory. When I know I have a big project, there's a lot to do, you just chip away at it and you work your way through it. And maybe there are things that you haven't solved and you won't solve them until you get on stage, and that's fine. Just knowing that at some point the idea will come and it'll work itself out, and being able to settle into that, I think certainly helps it. And sort of in a ridiculous way, I work across different time zones, and that really helps juggling, because you know, like I might be in London, but I've got to deliver something in Sydney, but it means I can do a presentation on Skype, but I can be in a rehearsal room, and you use your team around you. You have people. I mean, I'm really bad at letting other people do things for me, but you try and take on a little bit of help just to get the practical things done. And you sort of also, like, it's really lame, but you just don't sleep that much. And that's fine, because then you finish a project and you do. I don't know. I'm a sucker for it. I really like my job.
Sounds easy.
I really like my job, and I do it because I feel really lucky that I get to do it as much as I do. Because there are heaps of people who are really incredible designers. And there isn't enough work in the world, and I am incredibly grateful for the position that I'm in, and I don't therefore want to let anyone down that I'm working with.
Cool. We might, there's a lot of students listening in from NIDA, so we might flick to some of those questions that they can shoot to me here in Zoom. But while we wait for that, I want to ask you a few things. Like, do do you actually have a work over this 20-year career now that you're most proud of?
Oh, I sort of turned to a couple. I was really proud of, oh, no, was I? Yeah, I guess Julius Caesar, which was my first show with Benno at the Sydney Theatre Company. But I think I was so in love with that cast. I couldn't get enough of them. I just thought that they were magnificent humans and some of the best actors I've ever worked with in that show. It was such an incredible ensemble that Benno put together.
And what was it about that show that made you so proud of it? Was it your relationship with the actors or?
I think it was this moment where I got to flex something as a designer that I'd always, this is something I couldn't articulate at the time. I didn't know this is why I loved it. But I got to flex something as a costume designer that I'd always wanted to do and that had always been, and I remember when I was in third year, Dr. Peter Cook said to me, you will have the rest of your career to make shows in the mud with, I think he said Justin Cozell. So use what you've got in front of you right now. And I think I was doing a period show at the time and I didn't understand how I could make my aesthetic work with that. And I think I was doing that show with Benno and I realized that he was right. And I got to flex these muscles that I'd never used. And it was terrifying. But then, the minute I watched it on stage, it was completely electrifying to see my work in a Benedict Andrews production. I'd had like a 10-year plan to work with Benno.
Right. And it happened in one.
Yeah. So that will always be a really important kind of show for me. And I think Snowtown, because we survived it. Right. We had no money, we had no time. We had this incredible cast and this really important story. And it was, and the story was hard, but I've never laughed more than the 12-ish weeks we spent in Adelaide making a film about serial killers. It's
often the case, isn't it? Certainly in my experience, the shows which are the most dealing with the most horrifying subjects tend to be the hospital rooms.
Yeah.
Here's a question from a student, Alice. And the question is, what have been some of your biggest roadblocks for such a determined, passionate designer as you are? What are the biggest roadblocks you've faced?
I think it's not really a road. Is it a roadblock? I feel like I've been really lucky. I haven't faced a lot of big roadblocks in my career. I think hard things for me have always been deciding where to position myself next. And usually earlier I would make that decision based on kind of a fear of never working again. And I think sort of overcoming that, which is the fear we all have and still have every day. But I think finding a way to sort of push through that fear of people never employing me again or not liking my work and therefore not liking me was something that I had to kind of overcome. But it took me a really long time to be able to also sort of separate those things.
Yeah, that's an internal roadblock, isn't it? Yeah.
It's the worst. I was talking to someone this morning and she's an incredible artist and I said, how are you? She said, nervous and excited. And I said, it's horrible, but I actually think that's my favorite state of being. That kind of will it work, won't it work? But I'm so jazzed to try it anyway. That kind of edge of the mountain point is sort of my weird home.
Yeah, those internal fears and roadblocks remind me of a comment that Nick Enright once made to me, and it was just after he won an Academy Award for co-writing the film,
Sure.
Directors Oil.
Sure.
And I remember at Nick's house, there were all these offers coming in from Steven Spielberg's Amblin company to write screenplays. I mean, he was inundated with work after winning an Academy Award. And I remember him saying one day to me that one day they're all going to wake up and realize what a fraud I am.
All of us. Nick was right.
And it really struck me because that's such a common experience for an artist, not from anyone, but really for artists, that someday we're going to be found out. We're kind of just making it up. You know?
All the time.
Yeah. So here's another question that's just come in, Alice, which is, what advice would you give newcomers to the industry?
I think the landscape now, in terms of theatre especially, is really different to when I graduated. You know, I finished, I was in a fortunate position where amazing directors gave me work just at the end of my third year at NIDA, David. But I had this thing, and it was just before I went to NIDA, I think, where I just didn't say no to anything. A show, like there'd be a show at a theatre, there'd be no money, it'd be a co-op, it'd be a whatever. But if I liked the people who were trying to make this, I just committed myself wholly to it, thinking that, you know, that the whole could be a great sum of all of our parts. And I think that kind of, I had this sort of dogged commitment to it and wanting everything to be great. And I think that as hard as it is, because you also need to earn some money and you need to pay your rent and but finding a way in to a group of collaborators who speak the same language as you and will push you and challenge you, and then you can kind of carry each other. You know, I love watching teams work together. I love watching the evolution of teams, and I love being part of those teams. And I think, you know, finding your people in your artistic community is a great way to sort of help do that. And a good way to start it is just by not necessarily saying no.
Right. Do you say no much these days?
I say no more, but I'm really bad at saying no. I like saying yes.
Right.
But I also think maybe in this day and age, you know, I think before I sort of had a mentorship. I had Fiona, and that was a really incredible thing for me. And I remember when I was in second year, Jenny Tate, just the most brilliant costume designer and set designer, was one of our tutors. And Jenny talked about how she'd had a mentorship when she was younger and how important it was to her. And I think if you can find that person who knows a bit more than you and has done a bit more than you, but gets you and you get them, then they will always be a great ally for you.
Cool.
Yeah.
Here's another question. What shows are you working on now? Or what shows are you looking forward to the most?
A show I did in London and New York a few years ago with Simon called Yerma is coming back, but it's coming back with a new cast in Berlin at the Schaubühne at the end of this year. And ordinarily I'd be like, yeah, great, Yerma again, I love that show. But because it's a new cast, I've decided to redesign it, because I also designed it like 4 or 5 years ago, and there are certain things that are required for the costumes to work because it's quite a technical show. But I think I've sort of started working out how to revisit that and looking at this cast and how they might work. I'm reading a lot of scripts, a lot of film scripts, which is really great. And I've started sort of working on a couple of them. And I'm working on this little fashion project here for the next sort of 12 months with like an old Australian heritage brand that's relaunching. And so I'm sort of doing all of their I'm just working out how we visually present them to the world.
Cool. That's great.
It's great.
I saw Yerma at the Young Vic, which was an extraordinary experience, and 2 of the best performances I've seen in my life, I think.
How good's Billy Piper?
Billy Piper and Brendan Cowell.
I know Brendan Cowell, so wonderful. Yeah, the Young Vic both the seasons, they were really beautiful. It's a beautiful show.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So it'd be great to see it and do it again with a different cast.
Are they actors from the Shabana?
Shabana, company, yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay, good. Okay, I think we're at the end of our time now, Alice.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck with those projects coming up.
Thank you.
And lovely to see you again.
So nice to see you.
Yeah. Thank you for being very generous with your time.
Oh, please.
Yeah.
Anything for you.
Okay.
Have a lovely day.
Well, okay. Cheerio. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.